Welcome to Author Life Podcast, where myself and guest authors share their stories, offer tips and advice, and share our writing, publishing, and marketing knowledge. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. Welcome back. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. Today we're going to be talking about creating a character with depth. And we're talking about this because this can be a difficult aspect of writing for both new and established authors. The goal of creating really well-rounded, interesting characters is that you're basically making your characters as real to your readers as they are to you. And that's not always easy to do. So we're going to talk about some different tips and methods on where to start when building your characters. And because you have a couple of different options, kind of depending on what type of writer and reader you are and what's going to work best for you. So the first option that I'm going to talk about is character profiling. And this is basically starting with all the information about your character. With the basics of who they are, what they're about. So when you create a character profile sheet, you need to be as detailed as possible. And this includes things like your physical characteristics. You want to know what color are their eyes, what color are their hair, their weight, height, build, any physical deformities or unique characteristics that make them stand out, things like that. Get down all of those important details that are going to help you create a picture of who your character is on a physical level for your readers. The next thing you want to consider are personality traits. And, just kind of what type of person are they? Are they generally happy? Are they always gloomy and morose? Are they optimistic? Do they see the world as generally a bad place, a good place? How do they go through life? How do they handle situations? What is their general attitude? So once you have those two, then we want to move on to their likes and dislikes. And these can be basic things like foods, colors, things like that, or getting into a little bit more in depth, things they like about their family, about people they work with, politics, religion, things like that. Try to get past just a little bit more than, they like to eat pizza and Oreo cookies, things like that. Moving on from there, you also want to really start to get into their psyche, thinking about their fears and their dreams. Because everybody is afraid of something. It gives us motivation to not do things at times because we are scared of those situations or people or maybe even objects. And on the flip side, we have dreams that push us to do things that maybe are outside of our comfort zone, a little bit unusual for us, things that we really have to work toward and develop skills in order to achieve. And both of those fears and dreams are going to be important to developing a well-rounded character. Similarly, you want to think about their talents and their goals. What strengths do they have as far as their skill set, maybe artistic or athletic talents? Maybe they're a good listener, things like that. Get a wide variety so you have a good idea of different things that they're going to be good at. And what do they want to accomplish with those talents? And this is a little bit different than their dreams. Dreams are a little bit more far-reaching, maybe slightly unrealistic at times. With their goals, you want them to be more specific, things that are achievable in either the short term or the long term, but there are steps they can take in order to reach that goal. Where maybe the dreams are a little bit more kind of vague or out in the distance somewhere. And one of the last things I want you to consider when doing your character profiling are your character's flaws. Yes, they have talents, they have dreams, they have all of that, but they're going to have some characteristics as well that hinder them from reaching their goals or dreams or having good relationships, And that can be a variety of things. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the podcast. So just keep that in mind. Think about things that your character is not good at, or that struggles with, or has some personality or character flaws that could hinder them. So the second option for starting to build your character, if you are a more visually oriented person, you may want to start with a picture. And this might be, just cruising Pinterest or stock photos or what have you, and finding an image that kind of speaks to you about who you think this character is. Maybe, on a physical level, or maybe their expression strikes you. Whatever it is that kind of draws you in and makes you feel like this is a good representation of your character, that can give you a really good place to start. So you're not just starting from scratch. You have this image that relates to your character in some way. And you can start with just describing what you see, getting the physical characteristics, the emotions, things like that kind of out of the way off the bat. And then I want you to go deeper than just how they look or what expression they're wearing. What motivates these characters? Why are they, looking like they might be depressed or in a scary situation? What has brought them to that point? What are their goals? Do they want to stay in the same situation? Are they working to get out of it? Are they building on some past situations that have shaped them and working to do something new? Also, what are they afraid of? That can be a long list for a lot of people. And it just like we're trying to make our characters real, they need to have things that they're afraid of as well. And sometimes the picture can give you some inspiration on that. And sometimes you may just be building, purely out of your own creativity, which is perfectly fine. So kind of use this picture as you're looking at it, as you're kind of studying it, and start making your list of characteristics and traits that are going to start to build this one image into a fully developed, well-rounded character. Now, when developing characters, something that is really important is learning how to use and when to avoid stereotypes. Now, sometimes the definition of stereotypes gets a little bit jumbled, especially maybe for some of our younger writers who maybe that definition is kind of skewed by, the world that they're living in currently, whether that be high school or things like that. So what exactly is a stereotype? The definition of a stereotype is a character that is so ordinary or unoriginal that they seem like an oversimplified version of a person, class, gender, etc. You can kind of apply that to any group of people. So when you're thinking about stereotypes, they are flat characters. They don't have a lot of depth to them because they are expected. You know what they're going to do. You know what they're going to say. And you can kind of, as the reader, pass those off and be like, yeah, I know who that is. And thinking about that, why do you want to avoid this in most situations? For one, stereotypes are rarely accurate. It may apply to one or two people within that group, but most often that is not going to be a true representation of every person within a group. And not only can they be offensive to people in that group if they are inaccurate, they also make for really poor characters because, going back to that expectedness, readers can guess exactly what they're going to think, do, say, or how they're going to respond to a situation. And that creates a really boring character because there's no element of uncertainty or surprise when dealing with that character anymore. Now, there are times that you may want to use a stereotype, but it needs to be done in the right way so that you're using them effectively and not ending up with flat, boring characters. So stereotypes in general have developed for a reason. If we consider the high school example, typically if you walk into any high school, you're going to find, groups that are jocks, that are cheerleaders, nerds, the emos. You kind of have that little skanky subgroup that maybe is doing some questionable stuff. You can identify those groups of people in that setting. Now, of course, that doesn't mean, every jock is unintelligent. That's obviously not true. So you can find those stereotypical groups, but you're not going to find that every person within those groups fits the stereotype. And that's kind of where you need to find that balance. And I think that the reason you see that is that at this age, being defined and having a label for teenagers does provide some sense of safety and confidence, kind of gives them that idea of self on some level. So it's not unusual at all to find these kind of, quote, stereotypical groups, while the people within them are varied and diversified and have many different characteristics. And this is not just true when we're talking about teenagers. If you think about the adult workplace, you're going to find similar types of people that may in some way fit some sort of stereotype. For example, you may have kind of those brown nosers that are always sucking up to the boss, doing extra, trying to get that attention. You're going to have those slackers who are always passing their work off to somebody else, the workaholics, the office gossip, always spreading rumors about everybody. So you do get those, again, kind of those stereotypical types of people, but you're very rarely going to find someone who fits a stereotype exactly, because human beings are just so much more complex than that. So you have a wide variety of personalities, even though you may find those typical types of people who fit a mold of a stereotype. And that can definitely work, but again, just kind of be careful about using a stereotype for a typical group or type of person versus turning them into a stereotypical character with no other levels to their personality. So how do you do this the right way? This is the hard part. What you basically do is you start with some level of a stereotype to instantly familiarize readers with the character's traits. Then you go deeper. You expand on what is on the surface. Basically, you want to surprise your readers. And I love this quote from Orson Scott Card talking about stereotypes. He says, "That's part of the power of stereotypes. They set up expectations so you can surprise your readers." So when you're thinking about stereotypes, think about it in that way. You can use them to set up an expectation for that character, but like with most writing, you don't want to leave your readers finding out that their easiest, most basic expectations are the correct answers. You want to surprise them. You want to go deeper. You want to have some twists and turns. Now, similar to stereotypes, and this often gets confused with stereotypes, are archetypes. There is definitely a difference in the definition and how and when you should use archetypes. So, what are archetypes, and should you or should you not use them in your writing? The definition of an archetype is a typical character, action, or situation that seems to represent a universal pattern of human nature. So this is not talking about a specific group or person. This is talking about a universal pattern seen throughout humanity or in a natural setting. So, a difference in wording, but a very different idea in the concept from what a stereotype is. So are archetypes bad? A lot of times, because they get confused a little bit with stereotypes, they're looked at as newer writers as a bad thing that they want to try to avoid. But archetypes can actually be used effectively when done right. For example, you have the hero, the innocent youth, the mentor. These are characters that appear in many, many works of fiction, from everything from comic books and graphic novels to some of the classics that you're going to be reading in your high school and college English and literature classes. The challenge with archetypes is creating one without falling into stereotype. Even if your character is following an archetypal pattern, they still need to be complex and unpredictable at times. So a few archetype examples from current fiction and popular literature and movies kind of helps you get an idea of what archetypes are and how they have been used effectively. So if we're talking about the hero is predominantly good, not completely good. They don't need to be, this perfect representation of pure good. They're human. They're going to have some struggles as well. So they're going to be mostly good, but they're still going to struggle against evil to restore balance or justice or, whatever your story entails. So it's not easy to be good, but they are trying. They are mostly going to be good. And a good example of this is Luke Skywalker from the Star Wars films and books. He is a very pure-hearted character, but he doesn't always make the right decisions, and he doesn't always do the most good thing. Another archetype example is the mother figure. And the mother figure usually guides and directs and offers spiritual or emotional nourishment. And this doesn't necessarily actually have to be a female character. It's more just about that sense of kind of a guiding motherly nature more so than gender. And a good example of the mother figure is Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz. She is someone who's kind of guiding them along their path. When they stumble a little bit, she steps in, kind of tries to give them that little bit of help, that little push in the right direction so they can keep going and moving forward to accomplish their goal. Another example is the innocent youth. And sometimes this one is combined with the hero, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So the innocent youth is usually inexperienced, weak in some way or another. That doesn't have to be a physical weakness. And they usually seek safety with others like them. And they're often very trusting, kind of haven't had those life lessons yet to teach them to be more skeptical of people, maybe a little bit more pessimistic. A good example of the innocent youth is Frodo from The Lord of the Rings. When you first get into either the book or movie, he's very, just happy-go-lucky, everything's wonderful, he's excited about the party, everything's going really good. And then all of a sudden he is just thrown into this crazy journey that really changes and shapes him as he goes. But in those first few chapters, he is very much the innocent, trusting youth. Now, the next archetype example is the mentor. The main task for the mentor is to protect the main character, and he does that by giving advice and training to help your MC succeed. And a wonderful example of the mentor is the Giver, from the Lois Lowry's book, The Giver. And he is responsible for training the receiver and explaining to him through these shared memories how the world works now, why it's done that way, what the world used to be like, and then trying to, give this more subtle message of, is this the right way things should be done? And kind of helping and guiding the receiver toward understanding and having a better vision of what the world should be like. Now, the next archetype example is the doppelganger. And this is often combined with other characters as well, both good and bad. It's an interesting one. The doppelganger is a duplicate or shadow of the main character that's used to show their darker or somewhat evil side. And a very clear-cut example of the doppelganger would be Mr. Hyde from the Jekyll and Hyde pairing. And that one's, obviously a good versus evil on the surface. If you really delve into the story, it's quite a bit muddier than that on which one is completely good, if there is one, and which one is completely evil. Not quite as easy to discern that on the surface. But that is the purpose of that character. It was to kind of, show that contrast. And it doesn't always have to be that stark. It can be, a side character helping the main character who is, maybe not quite as virtuous and good-hearted, and shows kind of that alternate path that the main character could be taking. Or you can flip-flop it and have someone on the more villainous side who is showing possibly a better route that the villain could be taking. So, very, very interesting archetype there that can be used in a lot of different ways. Another one is the scapegoat, and this archetype tends to take the blame for everything. This can be, again, a good or a bad character, or something kind of in between. A good example of the scapegoat is Chuck from The Maze Runner. He kind of just gets railed on and gets blamed for a lot of stuff and gets pushed around. And that's his role through the early parts of the book, as someone kind of for the other characters to vent their frustration on. The villain is an easily recognizable archetype that you're going to have in most stories. You always want to have a bad guy. The purpose of your villain is to oppose or defeat the hero, and it may also be who the hero must defeat in order to win. I think a really good example of that is President Snow from the Hunger Games series. And I chose him as the example because he really shows kind of that element that his way is the only way, and he believes that he is right and that he is in the right doing what he does at the expense of everyone else and all the other characters in the book. He's an interesting example to look at. The next one is the trickster, who causes trouble, conflict, and stumbling blocks to the main character's progress or success. This isn't necessarily an evil character, but they are causing some issues and making it more difficult for your main character to achieve their goals. And an example of this one is Gabriel, or also known as the trickster, from the Supernatural TV series. He pops up occasionally and just causes problems for the brothers Sam and Dean, and most of the time doesn't really have a good reason for doing it. He's just in there causing trouble and kind of being a hindrance to them in whatever it is they're doing at that time. The next one is the Ubermensch, and this is someone who is seemingly unbeatable and omnipotent. This can be a good character or a bad character. An example of that is Superman. He's on the good side most of the time. You got those few random comic books or movies where he flip-flops. But the important part with the Ubermensch is the seemingly unbeatable. They can't actually be unbeatable, but they need to appear that way. For a really interesting look at the idea of the Ubermensch, I would recommend Brandon Sanderson's book, Steelheart. Very fascinating concept with that book, with the kind of superhero and weakness idea and how that worked. Definitely check that out. It was really a good read. Very interesting. And the last example of the archetypes is going to be the outcast. And this is someone that is exiled either physically or socially due to some mistake or transgression. And this is one that can be often combined with the hero or a mentor or the villain. And that exiling and the reason behind it can be a motivation either for good or for bad. And the Beast from Beauty and the Beast is a good example of that, where, he starts off kind of this arrogant jerk, won't extend help to the lady who shows up at his door, and then is exiled in order to learn a lesson. So, interesting example there. You can find that a lot in a variety of fiction and movies. Now, let's delve a little bit deeper into creating your characters. The next section that I want to talk about is developing your character arc. Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of developing a character. There are 3 stages to developing a character arc. But before I go into the specific stages, let's look at the most basic idea of what a character arc is. This is basically who your character is at the beginning of the book and who you want them to be by the end of the book. And those two should obviously be different. You need to have some change as they're going through their journey. And the arc is basically that journey that they take in order to move from character A to final character B at the end of the story. This is the main question your character arc needs to fulfill through the course of a story. Developing a strong character arc will help you create a character with depth. So, stage 1 of the character arc is where you have the catalyst. You need something that will force your character onto the path that will change them from who they are to who you want them to become. This can be physical and or internal, mental, emotional, whatever works with your story, but you need to have something that basically gets them off the couch, out of their normal routine, into a new situation that is going to push them to grow and develop new skills. So basically, the catalyst is a problem. It's something your character needs to overcome. Some examples of that from some popular fiction today is Triss finding out she's divergent in the Divergent series. That's a pretty huge catalyst for her, causes some life-changing decisions that she has to make. And also Katniss volunteering for the Hunger Games in order to save her sister Rue. That definitely necessitated some huge life changes and different outlook on the world as she tries to survive the Hunger Games. So the journey to overcome this problem is what will test that your character and force them to grow both personally and emotionally. Now, stage 2 of your character arc involves your character attempting to resolve the problem that they encountered in the first stage. Of course, things can't go easy for your character. That would be boring. In order to make sure your character keeps growing, they need to continue to face new obstacles, which basically means keep making things worse on them. Be mean. Be mean to your characters. Why do you need to be mean? Basically, as your characters face new problems, they learn new skills. They become more capable, and they become more like the person they need to be in order to reach that final goal. So a good example of this is Luke Skywalker when he's training with Yoda. He's not quite the hero he needs to be at that point, but he is learning skills in fighting and in life lessons that he needs to progress a little bit closer to who he needs to be. So stage 3 of the character arc is basically your resolution stage. This is where your story reaches its climax and your character discovers who they are becoming. This is not always the resolution of your character's completed arc, especially if you're writing a series. This may be the first realization for the character of who they want to be or who they will become. So this overall arc may extend throughout the series, but you do want to have smaller individual arcs for each book in a series. Examples of good resolutions to a character arc are Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind. In the beginning, if you've ever seen the show, she is a very young, very spoiled, very self-absorbed young woman. And after she goes through, war and these really difficult times at the end of that first portion of the story, she really comes out of it a very strong, self-possessed woman who is so much more capable than she was at the beginning. Another example is Belle from Beauty and the Beast. It kind of cracks me up now to listen to the songs as an adult, because that first song when she's talking about the town and how provincial everybody is compared to her just because she reads books, she's not only very naive, she's very judgmental of everybody. And it really takes her growing up and seeing the world outside her tiny little village before she finally realizes, people are much more complex, and strength and goodness come in a lot of different forms, not just, her version of, intelligence making her better than everyone else. Now, your full character arc may stretch over a series, like I said, but remember, within each book, you should have all 3 of these stages of the character arc, with the character reaching some kind of important realization at the end of each book. Now, there are times where you're not going to have a character arc. This is kind of one of those know the rules and then break the rules. So you might be asking now, after I've kind of harped on your character arc for a few minutes, can you write a good character without having a character arc? Absolutely you can, but only in certain genres where that is both expected and it works. You're mainly going to see this in mystery and detective series. A good example of that is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, especially in the original series of serial books, he never changes. He's always predictably brilliant and quirky. And in the newer BBC version, he is slightly homicidal as well. But he is largely the same throughout his stories. He doesn't have a big character arc because the focus is mainly on the individual cases, not as much about the character and their development. Now, the other genre that this tends to work well in is the adventure genre. So think Indiana Jones here. The stories are fun and exciting. Indiana Jones as a character is really enjoyable, but he's not real personal. He doesn't have a lot of personal and relationship development. Basically, he has a new girl every movie. And that's because, again, the focus is more on the individual adventures that he goes on, more so than his overall progression as a character. Now, in just about every situation with your character, you want to have a really good backstory. Your backstory is going to help fill them out and make them more of a real person to your readers. So this is kind of filling in all those middle bits of your character to finish out the well-rounded aspect of their character, now that you have all the details in place. So we do that by developing a good backstory. This tells your readers why your character is the way they are. This is when you want to go back to all of those personality flaws, fears, annoying habits, hopes and dreams, all of those things that you developed earlier. Now you're going to find out where those came from if you haven't already formulated that already. The reason behind a flaw is what makes it interesting, not just having a flaw. A good example of this is Lena from Beautiful Creatures. She is afraid of falling in love because of the curse on her family that tells her she'll turn evil and hurt the people she cares about. That is more interesting than just being shy and not asking a guy out that she likes. There's a really good reason behind why she can't bring herself to get involved. Now, a really important thing to remember with backstory is just like with an iceberg, most of the backstory that you come up with and develop will never appear on the pages of your book. So don't try to shove it all in there and have these long flashbacks and these super long explanations. You just want to give little hints of the backstory throughout the story when it's pertinent and when it needs to be brought up to explain something. Now, let's talk a little bit more specifically about faults. Faults are really important because nobody likes perfect characters. They are boring and sometimes obnoxious. Every character needs to have a few faults. So a good exercise for developing this is to write down at least 5 faults that your character has and go a little bit deeper than not being able to make a free throw or something like that. Unless your book is about basketball and that's important. But let's think a little bit more on the side of personality flaws, such as they may be unreliable, eccentric, immoral, very volatile. You also want to take into consideration their fears, and these can be common or complex fears. For example, even with Indiana Jones, his fear of snakes does get him into trouble quite a few times. But, starting with some of those more basic fears and then try to move deeper and really develop some more complex fears as well. You also want to think in the form of weaknesses. And this could be physical or it could be more on the emotional side, such as having a character who's very unemotional and has difficulty with relationships. Or perhaps they're very domineering, either in a relationship, in their workplace environment, or possibly they might be a perfectionist. Things like that are going to give them that added depth and really round out their personalities. Now, moving from faults, let's take a little bit different look at that. And we want to talk about contradictions. Faults are, like I said, very important, but they're not enough to make your character truly realistic. You need to have a character that is contradictory at times. And why? Basically because no real person behaves the way they should all the time. It's just not how we're wired. We do things that we know are wrong, we go against our own beliefs or morals, and we do the opposite of what we intend to do all the time. That's just how human beings are. It's difficult to 100% always do the right thing, always do what is expected of you. And of course, this can go the other way too when we're talking about our more villainous characters. Give your bad guy a soft spot. Nobody is all good or all evil all the time. You need your characters to have a good mix of both. Now, an important part of building your character, just like building your plotline, is that you have conflict. And this is going to be a more personal conflict, not so much your situational conflict that develops in your storyline. This needs to revolve around the character specifically. So this is largely internal. It can be situational at times, but a lot of the personal conflict is going to be more of an internal conflict. And a good way to bring these in is to go back to your list of fears and faults. Which of these fears or faults will your character face and try to conquer in the story? because you want them definitely to be overcoming some of these things, but because they are a fear or a fault, it's going to be difficult for them to face that, and that's what we want. While trying to overcome the main conflict in the story, your character also needs to overcome these internal conflicts that are holding them back in some way. If they just kind of gloss over and somebody else saves them from having to face them, your character won't complete their arc and won't end up in the position that they need to be in at the end of the story. Now, along with conflict, we need to deal with some failure when you're writing. Just like nobody likes a perfect character, nobody likes a character that always makes the right decisions and always succeed. For one, that's not realistic, and two, that is again not very interesting either. If your character always succeeds, where is the tension in the story? Where is the worry for readers that they might fail? Without that, your readers will definitely get bored. A story needs fear that the character will fail or die or be beaten in order to keep readers flipping through the pages. Even if they think they know where the story is going, they want to find out how the character is going to get there. Now, failure can be difficult to really use effectively. So you might be asking, how do you make your character fail without it seeming forced? You would definitely want to look back at their list of faults and flaws. Which of those can you use to put them in a situation where making the right choice will be difficult? A good example of this is from a book called What We Saw at Night. The main character, Allie, does not tell the police what she saw because she's afraid of getting in trouble for being somewhere she shouldn't have been. And that leads the reader to wonder, well, why was she out at night? She's a young girl, not an adult in the book. I believe she might have been 11 or 12. I can't remember for sure. And basically she's out at night because she has a very severe sun allergy and has to stay inside all day. And she's started taking risks because she thinks she won't live very long in these conditions. And so taking those risks, going against what she should have been doing, put her in a bad situation, put her in a situation where she had to make a difficult choice, and she makes the wrong choice. So she's set up to fail, and she does fail in a very realistic and relatable way. Now, when you use failure and you don't use it effectively, you end up with nonsense failure. And this will drive readers crazy. So you really want to try to avoid nonsense failures as much as possible. So you want to ask yourself, does it make sense in real life? And a couple examples here from some popular books and movies. If some guy told you that he was sneaking into your bedroom at night to watch you sleep, most rational people would freak out about that. That's creepy. Nobody wants someone watching them while they sleep. Bella, however, she is totally okay with that. She's pretty happy about it, actually. And doesn't cause a fuss, doesn't, freak out, anything like that. And this is something in that book that has garnered criticism from readers and critics alike, because it wasn't a very realistic reaction, and everybody kind of picked up on that. Another one is from The Parent Trap. I prefer the old version to the new version, but the story is basically the same. And as you're watching, you kind of have to ask yourself, would two parents ever actually split up twin girls and never let them see each other or know about each other, basically because they're selfish and they don't want to have to deal with dealing with their ex or custody or anything like that. So they keep these two twin girls apart for the majority of their lives. Would anyone actually do that? I have to say I highly doubt that. That's really a pretty terrible thing to do, and that's not a very realistic situation. Even though the movies are cute, I don't think that would happen in real life. So when helping characters make decisions, make sure there's a good reason for what they choose, either the wrong decision or the right decision. Lean on the backstory that you crafted. Do their fears influence them? Or maybe have past hurts cause them to mistrust others when they shouldn't? Give them a reason that they're making whatever choice you have them make. It needs to make sense to the reader. Now, another important aspect of developing your characters is love. And this is not necessarily romantic love. If that's not the type of story you're writing, that is totally fine. But every character needs something or someone to love. If they don't have something they're afraid of losing, what can they be threatened by? What is going to cause them to do something out of character or put themselves at risk? A character with nothing to lose is also a character with nothing to gain, which makes them very static and uninteresting most of the time. This is a theme that you see a lot in comics. For example, the masked superhero has nothing to lose and he's safe until he falls in love, and suddenly that person he loves is threatened and he has to do something either out of character or very risky in order to protect and fight for that person. Again, that may be romantic, that may be more of a familial relationship. Either one works. You just want to make sure that you give your character a reason that they want to survive or escape or win or, whatever it is the goal. They need a good reason for that. So the last piece of advice that I'm going to give before we wrap things up is that you try to live your character's life. This can be the most challenging part of developing a character. You don't have to be telling your own story to connect with your character on an emotional level. You may not have experienced what your character has firsthand, such as maybe abuse or death of a loved one or, war, something like that. But you have experienced fear, excitement, joy, sorrow, grief, anger, all of those things on some level in your own personal life. Build on what you know of these emotions and then pour them into your character, multiplying when necessary or downplaying. Use what you know of these emotions and situations and then develop them further for your character. Your characters aren't alone in their journey because you're taking it with them, and that really helps to bring it to life. So basically, kind of a parting thought is that you need to take your character on a journey that matters, and you'll take your reader on a journey they won't forget. Because when they feel like your character matters to them, they become real and they become emotionally invested in whether they succeed or fail. So hopefully these tips were helpful in helping you develop a more well-rounded and developed character. I'll be back next time talking about villains, as well as how to create good, memorable secondary and tertiary characters as well. So thank you for tuning in again. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks again for listening to Author Life Podcast. For more information on the podcast or guest authors, check out the links in the show description. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, find me online and send me suggestions anytime.